Hey everybody, welcome to the very first coding stream on my channel. I typically do coding content, but I want to try something a little different, having more conversations around specific topics versus just diving straight into a project. That way there's a level of learning there on my end and also providing value back to you. So today what I want to do is talk a little bit about server actions, specifically in Next.js. So Next.js is a JavaScript React framework that specializes in server rendered content versus strictly being on the front end. You have the ability to build a full stack app in Next.js from a deployment perspective. So what I want to discuss today are server actions and how they make your life easier as a developer and build a simple CRUD project using server actions that will basically build on every day until we have a production grade application that symbolizes or utilizes all of the latest features in Next.js, utilizing the documentation as the guide and various articles on various dev platforms to kind of help with the build of this, to just kind of have a different perspective than just the Next.js docs and utilizing what's already out there to kind of help build what we want to accomplish. So with that said, I'm going to jump in and get started. So as mentioned, today we're going to be discussing server actions. And if you don't know what server actions are, basically, if you wanted to submit a form or submit data, you would need to set up an API route that handles a post request on the server. You need to fetch that data on the client. Then you need to deal with some form of state and revalidation. Typically, that's around a 3 to 5 step process, and it could be even more or less than that, depending upon what you're looking to do. But it is very complicated and it is much simpler to accomplish the same feat with other programming languages. So with server actions, you kind of get to skip all of that and just write a function, just like a regular JavaScript function that'll run on any server. And you can call it from a form, from a user interface, and it just makes form submission that much easier. So today I'm going to walk you through all of this by reviewing a great article from the Mozilla Dev documentation. And this was written by a gentleman named Nikita, and I cannot pronounce his last name, but I'll have a link to the article in the description. And we'll just kind of read through this and the Next.js documentation that kind of talks through what server actions are and how to create them in Next.js. So starting with the docs. Server actions are asynchronous functions that are executed on the server. They could be called in a server and client components to handle form submissions and data mutations. Now, this is a pretty cool video if you ever have the opportunity to check it out. This is a video by one of the founders or one of the developers that really leverage Next.js. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but feel free to check this out if you're interested in it. But the conventional or the way to write it, a server action can be defined with the React use server directive. You can place this at the top of an asynchronous function to mark that function as server action, or at the top of a file, which will mark the entire file that export as a server action file. So with a server component, it could be used as an inline function. All you need to do is have the asynchronous function, or excuse me, all you need to do is have the server action added to the top of the function. Sorry about that. So in this particular example from the docs, they have a function named page, and inside of it running an asynchronous function named create, and has it marked as use server. So this is basically the syntax in order to create a asynchronous server action. In a client component, To call a server function a client component, you'll create a new file and add the use server directory at the top of it. All export functions within the file will be marked as use server. So the suggested way, if you were using client side components, and there'll be scenarios where you would create a server action by marking this file as use server with the use server directive at the top and just making the function asynchronous. In this case, it is create. And as you can see, it has asynchronous there. And then you can import a client side activity button. And this will be to either call this button is being used to call this asynchronous function. Okay. And you can pass the actions as props. So here you have a component named client component with a prop name update item action, and it is passing in the update item function that you created in this separate file. And here's what it will look like in a client side file. Okay. The behavior server actions can be invoked by using the action attribute in a form element. Server components support progressive enhancement by default, meaning the form will be submitted even if JavaScript hasn't loaded yet or disabled. Now, this is good because some browsers aren't as modern as others. And if you don't have JavaScript enabled or you're not able to utilize JavaScript, you'll still have the ability to submit data because this doesn't utilize any JavaScript and it works even if JavaScript isn't loaded. So that's great. And the client component forms invoking server actions will queue submissions if JavaScript isn't loaded yet, prioritizing client hydration. So a little different experience if it is marked as a client component, but it is pretty cool that you have the option to render a server action either in a server or client component. After hydration, the browser does not refresh on form submission. That's correct. Server actions are not limited to a form, can be invoked from event handlers, use effect, third-party libraries, and other form elements like a button. So that's pretty cool. Give you a little flexibility and allows still for you to maintain creativity in your project because you can invoke a server action from different elements. Server actions integrate with Next.js caching and revalidation architecture. When an action is invoked, Next.js can return both the updated UI and new data in a single server round trip. So utilizing either revalidation or redirect is going to allow you to use it and capture and get the most updated data from the server. Just kind of depends on how your application is designed to function. Behind the scenes actions use the post method and only this HTTP method can invoke them. Okay, the arguments can return value of server action must be serializable by React. And we can go over that if you wish to. They have the documentation link there. Server actions are functions. This means they can be reused anywhere in your project. Yep, that means that you'll just basically want to have those actions stored on a separate file so that they can be easily exported and integrated into different components in the project. And then going through the documentation, it has different examples of what it looks like. But to kind of walk through that, we're going to review this article by diving into Next.js server actions, simplifying data fetching and mutations. As I mentioned, this is by the gentleman named Nikita, and I cannot pronounce his last name, but shout out to this gentleman. And if you have a second, I'm going to link the article in the description below if you want to check it out. But he actually has a series of articles kind of talking through what server-side rendering is, server components in Next.js, how they work, and just some different routing techniques that you can use throughout Next.js, and also some parallel and intercepting routing as well, which is a little bit more of an advanced topic. But I'm going to cover that in a later video. So if you're interested in learning about that, we'll kind of talk through it together in a later video. So just to dive into the article, server actions are introduced a completely new way of handling data. Instead of making a traditional API call from the client to the server and then updating the client side state, you can now call server functions directly from your components. Yep, we just read about that in the documentation. This eliminates many unnecessary steps, reduces network requests, and improves performance. So, and we're going to walk through setting up a server action CRUD project that's just going to use a local array, and eventually we may connect it to a database. We're not going to worry about setting that up in this video. Just wanted to establish how the server actions work and get a simple project up and going. So as it was mentioning, and we can utilize what it is referencing here. To create a server actions are defined using the use server directive. Two primary ways to define them, either inside of a function or in a separate file with use server directive at the top. And we can utilize both approaches. The use server actions for mutation. So if we wanted to mutate the data within our data set or database, this is a guide on how we could do so. So let's say you need to delete a product from the catalog. Traditionally, you would send a delete request via an API, process the response, and update the interface. So this is just showing what it would traditionally look like. And as you can see, it's quite a bit of code here. You bring in next API request and next response so that these are two hooks from Next that's going to allow you to tap into the API and gather the response. So you can send it back to the browser. From there, you'll define the type, and we have the response data is going to be an array that we'll name product. Inside of the function, we're using the handlers and the API request and API response. In this instance, we're using the switch statement, passing in the request method. And if it is a GET request, there's a action that'll take place, and that will be to get the data. In this case, a mutation would be delete because we want to make a change to the database. Here he's going to destructure the ID that he's capturing from the body that's being sent from the front end, and he's using Supabase as the data source to store or persist all of the data. Starting with the .from method from the products table using the .delete method, and it is passing in the .eq. I'm not 100% sure what that is from Prisma, but it seems to be some form of function that is taking in two parameters, the ID. The initial one is what's being passed in, which is the ID, and then the actual ID itself that we got from the request. And then if everything goes well, it's returning the status of 200 and a message of success, and then the switch statement breaks. Otherwise, it is looking to get the methods based on the headers that's being passed in. And then we see that the front end request, and this is the code that's being ran on the server. So pretty straightforward, but quite a bit of code, as you can see. And then here's what you will see on the front end. So in a function or a page named catalog, you are destructuring the products and making a server request to /API/catalog, and you're also passing in fetcher. Then you're creating a function named handle delete that will be asynchronous. It's going to accept the product ID, and inside of it, a try catch block. And here's where you're making a fetch request to the API endpoint, and the method that you're using is delete. And here are the headers to kind of pass in what type of data that you should be getting, or to identify the headers that you'll be using to communicate with your API. The data that you're getting back, you're going to use the stringify approach so that you can pass through and manipulate that data. And then you have some form of validation here, if else statements, then catching, and you're mapping over all of the products and displaying them in the product card. So as you can see, the prior method was very, very detailed, and there's a few things that you could add to this to enhance the user experience even further. So as you could tell, this can be very, very tedious and a lot of code to kind of keep up with. And it also makes you very susceptible to errors because you're typing so much code out. It's very likely that you may miss something. You know, you may type in the wrong key, cause your code not to work properly. Then you could be spending minutes or even hours trying to debug and get it working. But with server actions, as Nikita mentioned, it is much simpler. So in this example, he has a directory named actions and a file named delete product.tsx, and he has it marked as a use server file, bringing in the connection or the connection function to Supabase. And in this example, he is exporting a const named delete product, takes in a product string, establishes the connection to Superbase, cycles the products table, and from there using the delete method to delete the product based upon the ID that's received. And then he's using revalidation or revalidate path from next cache. That way you are revalidating the data on the server, and it's kind of giving a real-time feel while you are deleting that product, so it can be done immediately. And we'll go through that later on once we set up our own server action. And here's what the component will actually look like. At the top, you're importing the two actions, get all products and delete products. And then you're creating an asynchronous function, or excuse me, then you have well, it is an asynchronous function, but the page component is asynchronous because you're running it on the server. And in this example, you are awaiting the request to get all products and just mapping over the products that you capture from the database, and for each one displaying a product card. And then inside of that product card, obviously you're going to pass in the key, which will be an ID. And then you have a on click method, which you're doing on delete. And then you're passing in the delete product function that you created in the separate actions directory. So as you can see with server actions, it is significantly different or less code than what we traditionally have written when we wanted to make mutations to the database. So cache management, revalidate path, and revalidate tag. After performing a mutation, you need to update the cache so that the changes are reflected in the UI. Next.js provides two functions to do this. So if you weren't aware, caching with Next.js is designed to, not only is it a server rendered, not only is it a server rendered um, um, gosh, I can't think of what the name of the thing is called. I'm drawing a blank for a second. Next.js is a React framework. It's server rendered, and by design, it works to optimize the performance of your website. So one of the things it does is it sets up caching where it's going to automatically cache your data so that there aren't several requests made to the server. Now you can opt out of that with various techniques, and one of those techniques in order to manage it that he's referencing here is revalidate path, or two methods in this approach is revalidate path and revalidate tag. So revalidate path is going to refresh the cache for a specific path. For example, if the products is deleted, you would need to revalidate the slash catalog page to display up-to-date data. So for us, if you have the delete button on the home page, you're going to revalidate the path of the home page because that's where you want to revalidate the data. Revalidate tag refreshes a specific piece of data rather than the whole page using the tag. So if you just wanted, so if you were running parallel routes and you wanted to just revalidate a specific section of the page and not the entire page, you can use revalidate tag just to update that specific section. And that's just another technique or feature of Next.js to kind of give a better user experience so that your project and application is a lot faster and runs more efficient. So fetching data with server actions, while server actions are often introduced as tools for data mutation, they can also be used to fetch data directly from the server. So here's just what that looks like. In this example, he has the actions directory and a file named loadproducts.tsx, the use server directive at the top, and it is asynchronous, and it's basically just going to load the products from the database. That syntax is pretty straightforward. You'll create a const with a variable name and set it equal to await loading the products as you have imported it into the component. And this is just what this looks like here. And in this example, he's using suspense to kind of help with the loading state. This is another technique within Next.js, and other frameworks have different methods of doing this. But basically what this is in the event that the data hasn't loaded that you're fetching from the server, instead of waiting on the entire page to reload, what you can do is you can designate specific sections to have that data reloaded. So for instance, if I have a static title and I'm waiting on the notes from the database to reload, instead of, if I click on refresh, instead of the entire page waiting for that data from the database to load, the static data will go ahead and load immediately. And then you'll see Suspense give a loading or a data fetching animation, whatever you decide for it to be. It's going to give that indicator until the actual data from the database itself has loaded up. So it's just another way to give a better user experience, to kind of optimize performance, to make sure that the end user knows that they're connected, and it's just an overall better performing application as well. Excuse me. This is one of the biggest limitations. Each server action is executed strictly one after another. This means that if you are making several server requests, fetching products, categories, recommendations, they cannot happen in parallel, unlike the standard fetch, where you can perform multiple parallel requests and await their completion simultaneously. Here's the sequential execution may slow down the response time in performance critical scenarios. This could become an issue. So that's kind of what we were talking about just now. You get the opportunity to kind of isolate that based on the way server actions work. With Suspense, you can isolate where you're having that data load as you're waiting on data to come back from the server, because that can vary based upon how large of a data set you're looking to have loaded. Server actions are always a post request. This was something that we just read about as well. And here's just kind of what it looks like. Server actions with form. A server action can significantly simplify form handling in React by allowing HTML forms to directly connect to the server-side logic. In Next.js, this is implemented by passing a server action as a form action. Once the form is submitted, the server function receives the form data object and can process it like any other server-side operation. And here's just what it looks like. And this is what our syntax is going to look like. But basically what he has is an asynchronous function named create product. It is accepting in form data. And then from there, you are destructuring the data. And if you get an error, you are passing in that as well. And then from the products table, they're just using .insert to insert the title, description, price, and category ID. And then upon successfully entering that data, just redirecting the user back to the dashboard /products/product ID page of this specific product. In this example, create product takes the form data, saves the new product. Yep, then redirects the user to the newly created products page. Now let's see how this server action integrates with a form. And as you can see from a server action perspective, in this example, he's using the use form status from React DOM just to capture the pending state. And this button, remember, is a client-side form or client-side activity. So yes, we're using the form action to create a new product, but then this is marked as a client-side file because we're using the form action, which is a client-side hook. The use form status, excuse me, is a client-side hook. So this file has to be marked as use client. As you can see, the server action is simply passed into the form's action attribute. When the form is submitted, it asynchronously runs on the server function, create product. However, there are a few key things to note. Asynchronous handling with use form status. React added the support for tracking the form status through use form status hook. This hook returns an object containing pending field, which indicates whether the form submission is in progress. This is useful for showing loading indicators and preventing duplicate submissions while the form is being processed. Pretty straightforward. With that capability, post requests and redirects, just like with data fetching forms using server actions, are always submitted via post. This means you cannot cache this request, but for most form operations like creating, updating data, caching isn't necessary anyway. Plus, server actions unlock the ability to perform server-side redirects as seen in the example using the redirect function. And it continues to kind of go on and talks about some of the benefits of server actions and how it handles post data. So with that, we'll go ahead and go back to the original documentation and get ready to build our own server actions using the latest version of Next.js. So give me a moment to set up my screen. Oh. So what I have currently is a nextjs15 project, and I went ahead and this project is using TypeScript. It's using the app router. We do not have a source directory, and I am using the Turbo Pack. But if you want to follow along, the key things is just to make sure that you have the app router, no source directory, and we are using TypeScript, but that's optional as well too. So to kick things off, in order to have server actions, we can create a server function two different ways. One, we can do it in the component itself, or we can create a separate directory and store it within that file. So in this example, I'm going to start by creating a server action in a separate file, and this is going to be the ability to create. So before we add that ability, we would typically establish a way to connect to a database. And because I'm not going to set up a database in this example, there's a few ways that we can store or persist data. This isn't ideal if you're looking to actually deploy this project or do something a little more useful with it. But if you just want to actually learn, then you can certainly follow along with this approach. So for right now, let's go ahead and create a directory named lib. And inside of it, we're going to add a file named server notes.ts. What this file is, we're going to define our note type. And from there, once we define the note type, we'll export a empty array named notes. And this is what we'll use to store all of our notes, whether we're creating, updating, getting, or delete a note. This is going to serve as the database. So we'll start by defining the type, and we'll say note. And our notes will have an ID, which will be a number. They'll have a title, which will be a string. They'll have content, which will be a string. And remember, we'll need to export this so that we can use it in other files. So we'll say export const notes. And this is going to be equal to a empty array. And we'll pass in a empty array. All right, perfect. Okay, so with our note type, which is kind of like a schema, and the notes array, the server notes file is set up, which is serving as our database. Next up, I want to establish the actual actions that we'll be using to update our data. So let's create a file name inside of the lib directory named actions.ts. At the top of it, we'll mark this file as use server. And for right now, um, I think what we'll do is we'll start by adding the first function, which will be the ability to create a note. And we'll remember this has to be a asynchronous function. So we'll start by export async function. The name of this function is going to be create note, and we're going to pass in form data. From the form, we want to capture the title. The syntax for that, remember, was form data.get, and we are getting title, and this is going to be a string. And then we want to capture the content. That will be form data.get, and that is content, and it will be as string. Then we'll need to do some form of validation check. In the event we don't get any data, we need to return something back to the user. So we'll say if no title, or we need to return something in general, or content, just return. Now, the next thing we'll need to do is create an object of the actual node itself. This is where you would typically utilize a method from either Prisma, Mongoose, Supabase, Convex, any of the other data storage mutation providers, update providers that you would use to update your data. But in this instance, we're just going to create a object named new note, and we'll set it inside of that object. We'll have the first key as a ID, and we're going to use date now as the ID. That way we'll get a random date and it'll be a random ID. Usually this will be something that you'll get from the actual method itself. It usually has some form of auto increment of an ID or auto identifier of an ID that'll be identified in the schema. But because we're not using that, we're just using the date. And then we'll pass in title. Sorry, that's just title, and then content. And then with this, what we want to do is we want to use a JavaScript method of unshift to pass this to the end of an array. And the array we're going to use is notes. So we'll go ahead and import the notes array or database. And that's going to come from /server notes. And then underneath the new note object, we'll go notes.unshift. And remember, this is just a JavaScript method, inserts new elements at the start of an array and returns the new length of the array. Okay, just so you know what that means. And then we'll do new note. Let's click save. Okay, so before we use the other methods, let's just go ahead and set up the file just to see what this looks like and get access to create notes. Or yeah, let's go ahead and do that now. So what we'll do inside of the project, in the app directory inside of the page.tsx file, if you're using a brand new Next.js project, then you know it comes with boiler code. So let's just go ahead and remove all of that now. And we'll make sure we'll spin up our application for the first time as well. Then in the terminal to start the project, we'll type in the command npm run dev and then press enter and give it a moment to start the project on the local host. So in this instance, it is going on localhost 3000. So we'll just go to the browser, go to localhost 3000. Okay. And as you can see, our project is up and working. So what we'll do first is we'll go ahead and let's start out by importing the ability to create a note. So we'll go import create note, which is the function that we just created. And it should be coming from the directory lib/actions. And then I'm also going to import the notes database. That's going to come from @/lib/server notes. That's the database that we just created. So with Next.js, it is set up to be server rendered out of the box. But remember, when we're running a server action, we have to designate either this as a client side file by using the use client directive or by marking the function as asynchronous. So in this case, I'm going to mark this file as, or excuse me, mark this function as asynchronous. So just make an export default async. And then inside of the return statement, this is where we're going to render the actual content. Now, I'm not going to bore you too much with the styling of this project because that's not really the point of this video, but we are going to create some styling. So in the div, the initial div, let's go ahead and create or add a class name. And inside of the class name, we'll remove the string and then we'll pass in the curly brackets and we'll pass in the const name container. And then at the top or right above the async function, we'll create a const name container and we'll set it equal to a string. And here is where we'll place the actual tailwind. You can use whatever you want to style this. That's not really the point, but if you're using tailwind, you go with MX auto to set the margins to auto. We'll set the max width to screen extra large, max width screen extra large. Let's set the background color to gray or neutral. No, excuse me, gray 50. And then we'll set the min height to screen. And let's press enter. Okay, so we don't notice much of a change just yet, but let's just confirm that it is working. So instead of it being background gray, let's make it background orange 500. And as you can see, it did change color, so it is working perfect. Okay, so inside of the initial div, I want a H1 to represent the title of the page. So we'll create a const name heading and we'll set it equal to text extra large. We'll make the text neutral 800. We'll give it a margin bottom of 2 and a font of light. Inside of the div, we'll add a H1 with a class name of heading. And it will say server action demo. Click save. And then we see that listed here on screen. So that's perfect. And I think we'll go with bold. Like that a little better. Okay. So next, inside of this, we're going to keep this super simple. I want the ability to create a note, and we're just going to have a title input and a content text area with a submit button. Nothing real elaborate, but underneath it, I want a list of all of the notes that we have created displayed in a a flexbox list maybe, or a grid list. I don't know just yet, but we'll also want to show that we don't have any notes created so that we can show that we have a connection to the database. So underneath this H1, I'll just make a note and display and name this display notes, display notes, display all notes. Okay. And underneath it, we'll have a div. I'll just add a class name with space on the Y of 4. And then we'll use some conditional rendering to loop over all of the notes in the array. If the length is 0, we're going to display a message, but if it is not, we want to show the notes. So we'll say notes.length. If it is equal to 0, then we're going to just display a message, no notes to display. Otherwise, we want to show all of the notes. So then we'll go notes.map. And for each note, we're just going to name it note. And then we want to display something. What we'll display is a div. We know the div will need a key, and it'll be notes.id. And then we'll show the H2 of note.title. And then underneath that, the p tag for note.content. Let me save this to get rid of that error. Okay. And as you can see, it is showing no notes to display, which means that we currently don't have any notes in the database. So with that, let's create or add the ability to create a note. So right above the H1, or below it, excuse me, I'm going to add a form, the form element. And within the form tag, remember, we want to use the action attribute to pass in the create note function. There we go. Sorry. Now, to test this out, we could just go ahead and pass in the inputs and text area. And just for simplicity, I'm just going to do that. So we'll go input, go ahead and close off that input tag. The name of this is going to be a title. We'll give it a placeholder of note title. And if I click save, we see that listed there. Okay. And after the input for title, we'll need a text area for the content. And with text area, yep, it's that closing tag. The name is going to be content. The placeholder will be note content. Click save. Okay, see that listed there. Last but not least, we'll need a button. This will be create note. And the type for this will be button. Okay, now let me just style this a little bit so it doesn't look so unappealing. So for the first const, we'll create we want to style the form. And for this, we'll just have some space on the Y of 4, and we'll give it a margin bottom of 6. Then inside of the form, we'll pass in class name, and the class name for this will be form. And we notice we get an adjustment. Next one will be input. So we'll go class name input. And I know it's yelling at me right now. And at the top, we'll create a const name input, set it equal to a width of full. Border, we want the border color to be neutral 300. Okay, we see that there. The padding will be 2. We'll go rounded. And we'll set outline to neutral 400. I think I want to give this a little bit of padding as well. We'll go padding of 6. There we go. Much better. Okay. So we have our input. And then for the text area, I think this actually can use the exact same thing. So we'll give it a class name of input. We could change it if need be. Yeah, that looks perfectly fine. And then last but not least, we'll want to style the button. So we'll go const the button and set it equal to a background of neutral 700. We'll set the text to white. This will have padding on the X of 4, on the Y of 2. And we'll just save it so you see what it looks like. I'm sorry, let me add it to the button. Class name button. Okay, that's what it looks like so far. And just to give it a little more style, we'll go rounded. We'll just go rounded period. And on hover, we want the background to be neutral 800. And we'll go transition. There we go. So now this should work. So once we click or once we add a note, title, and content, we should see it immediately listed here on the screen. So we'll go note title and content test. Okay, so it didn't actually send those notes to the database. Let's see here. Let's go into the actions. Okay, so we'll need to do something with that form data once we get it, or we'll need to do something once we've clicked the submit button. So for this, let's go with revalidate path. So we'll import revalidate path. This is coming from cache, excuse me. And the way we use the revalidate path hook is pretty simple. Remember, from the documentation, we basically just want to revalidate the data that we've gotten from the database. So we'll go revalidate path and revalidate the data there. And then what we want next is to test this out. Mm. So let's save this, refresh this, test title. Type submit. Sorry about that. Test title, test content. And there, voila, as you can see, it immediately shows the data there. So let's see what it looks like if we remove revalidate path. Because remember, it's not going to automatically refresh the screen because of the way Next.js does its caching. So we'll go second test, and we'll go second content test, create a note, and notice that it's submitted, but nothing took place. So if we refresh the screen, you see that we do get it, but the reason it didn't show up immediately is because we didn't revalidate the data. So let's go ahead and style this a little bit so that the card looks a little more presentable. So back in the page.tsx file, we'll add a class name of card, and we'll create a const named card and set it equal to an empty string, and then I'll just save this to get rid of the error. And for the card, we'll go border. We'll give it a border of neutral. We'll go neutral 300. We'll set the background to white. Give it a little padding of 2, and we'll go rounded. And though we can't see anything just yet because once we refresh or save this file, it's the title or the content is going to disappear because we're just storing the data in an empty array, excuse me, and not actually in a database. So the next thing I want to style is the actual card title. So we'll go class name card title, and we'll go for the p tag, we'll go class name card content. And then we might as well style the empty note state as well. So we'll go empty state. So we need 3 consts. The first is going to be card title. I set it equal to an empty string. Then we'll go const card content, empty string, const empty state, empty string, save. Okay, gets rid of the error. So now we'll just add a little bit of styling. So for the title, we'll go text of large, set the font to semi-bold, semi-bold. Yes, that's how that's written. Yes. The text color will be neutral. Let's make it neutral 900. Okay. The content will make the text small. The text color will be neutral 600 and a margin top of 1. The empty state will just set the text to neutral 400. Okay, so now let's just take a look at what this looks like. So we'll go test title, test content, save it, and we need to add revalidate path back. But if I refresh it, that's what the card looks like. So that's perfect. So in the actions directory, let's just go ahead and bring revalidate path back. Click save, and let's add another test title, test content. Perfect, and it immediately shows up. So we've successfully set up a server action with the ability to mutate data by adding a note and also deleting, or excuse me, and also capturing all data. The next steps in the CRUD functionality would be to update and delete data. So in order to do that, what I want to do is we'll add the ability to delete on the home page itself, and we'll just revalidate the data. And then to edit, we're going to link out to a separate page, use a dynamic route, and add the ability to edit a note based on that dynamic route. So we can go ahead and work on that. We can work on that now. I think we have a little time. So let's go back to close out that file. So I think, you know what, the first thing we probably should do is go ahead and add the actions to update and delete a note. So in the file named action.ts, We're going to store our ability to update and delete a note within this file so that it can be used throughout the project. So if you recall, in order to update or delete a note, we need to identify a note by its specific ID. So let's go ahead and create a function to get the note by ID. So we'll say in a comment, note by ID, and this will be a asynchronous function that we'll name get note by ID. And this will be a string. The ID will be a string. And then inside of it, we'll just create a const named note, set it equal to notes dot find. And we want to find the note. We'll use the built-in string method to convert the note ID to a string. And if the note ID matches the ID of the note in the array, we know that that is the identified note. And then what we want to do is just return it. So we'll say return note, or we're going to return null. So that's going to give us the ability to get that note by the ID, and we're going to use it rather shortly. Next, we need the ability to update notes. So we'll add a function or a comment named update note. This will be a async function. We'll name it update note. That will take a string and we'll pass in some form data. We'll have a const named title and set it equal to form data dot get, and we are getting the title. And we'll have a const named content so that we can get the content from the form data, just as we did with creating a note. And I actually could have just did this earlier. We'll say if no title, no content, just return. Now, first thing we need to do is identify the actual note. So we'll create a const named index, INDEX. Let me give it a little space. There we go. We'll set it equal to notes.find index, and that is a JavaScript method. And we're looking for the index of the notes that we just passed in from the form data. We're going to, I didn't need me to do that. Convert it to a string, and if the note ID matches the ID in the array, we want to return it. So now what we want to do is with that ID, that index, we want to capture it. So we'll say notes index, and we'll set it equal to destructuring or going through the notes array to find the index that matches what we're passing in. So we'll say notes index. And what we want is the title and content. This notes index is going to represent the ID of the note, and we're looking for that ID and the content. And then once we have it and it is updated, we want to redirect the user. So we want to redirect that user back to the home page, because the way we have the update ability work, we're going to dynamically send that information to a totally separate page. So let's go ahead and import redirect, and this is going to come from Next Navigation. Okay. And then we'll use that function, we'll use that hook to redirect the user back to the home page. So we'll go redirect, and we're redirecting the user back to the home page. And then the last functionality we want from a CRUD perspective is the ability to delete a note. So we'll go export async function delete note. We'll pass in the ID as a string, and we'll create a const name ID, a const name index. And we're basically doing the exact same thing that we just did before. So instead of writing it out, I'll just copy it and hopefully it's right. If not, we'll need to update both, and we'll return the same message if we can't find anything by the time we get to the end of the array. And then we'll use the dot splice method. And remember, splice takes two arguments, a index and the number. And in this case, we're going to pass in 1. And because we're staying on the same page with the delete button, we'll just use revalidate path just as we did with create, so we can revalidate the data. So these are our server actions to give us the CRUD capability. We have the ability to get the note by the ID. We have the ability to update the note and delete it. So with that, now we're ready to integrate this into the client side page. So in the page.tsx file, let's start by adding the ability to, or testing out the ability to delete a note. I think what I'll do is have it listed here. And we'll go, remember, in order to submit this request, it needs to be inside of a form. So first, let's just go ahead and import link. This is going to come from next/link. Is that in a, it may not be this. Let me see. There we go. All right. So underneath the p tag, let's add link, and we can give it a closing tag. And remember, a link needs a href, and we're going to dynamically pass in the node ID. And the href route we haven't created just yet. We're just going to name it slash $ curly braces note dot ID. And we'll just pass in inside of link update. Click save. And then after update, we want the ability to delete the note. So we'll add a form because we know we need to make this will be a mutation. And we're going to use the action attribute. And we want this to be a asynchronous request. So we'll pass in async because we're using this directly inside of the component. Uh-oh. Wait a minute, I got something mixed up there. Give me a moment. Okay. So in this form, let me add a button, be to delete. We'll set the type to submit. And then inside of the form, it needs a action. Let's try this again. This will be, so it'll be a little easier for me to see. This will be async. And we're passing in the use server directive because where we want to designate that this is going to run strictly on the server. And then what we want to do is await and use the delete note function that we just created. So let's import it now. We'll go import delete note. This is coming from @/lib/actions. That's the function that we just created. And we're going to run it inside of this form. So we'll go delete note. And remember, we're passing in the note ID. And from a user perspective, they won't need to see anything else. So what we can do now is clean this up just a smidge. Oh, let me see something. Let me just change this type to a string. No. This is something I'm drawing a blank. To convert it. So we'll say const ID is equal to number form data dot get. We'll get ID. Do it like this. Let's try a different approach. So that type. We'll go form data. Say const number. This should be lowercase. Form data dot get ID. We'll say if no ID, and just return. Go const index is equal to notes dot find the index note dot ID equal to ID, and we'll go if index is greater than -1, notes dot splice index 1. Sorry, not I1. And then we'll just go revalidate the path of the home page. So now I know I need to make some changes here. So we can change this. Say action will be delete note. And then we'll go input and we'll just test this out. We'll go input name ID, and the default value will be note.id. Click save. Now what we should do is we should see the ID instead or next to delete. And I just want to make sure that it's working. So we'll say test title, test content, create, and we see the ID listed there. Now let's click the delete button. And we notice that it is no longer there. Perfect. So it's working. So with this input, we'll just add a type of hidden. Click save. We'll go test title, test content there, delete, it's gone. So now what we want next is to have the ability to update or edit, and that will create, or that will finish out the CRUD functionality. So we know that the route works. We have it right here. So in order to create that catch-all dynamic route, inside of the app directory, create a folder in brackets named ID, and in it a file named page.tsx. And we'll export a default async function. We'll name it edit page. And for right now, let's just get something on screen. We'll go return div edit page. So I click save. If I go to this route, refresh it, that's what we should see. Perfect. So now let's bring in a couple of functions so that we have this ability. First, we're going to import the get note by ID function, and we'll also bring in update note. These are the two functions that we use to first get the note by its ID and then use that to update the note. So we'll need to establish a interface, and this is going to be the edit page props, the params. We want to destructure the ID as a string. Inside of this function, we'll pass in params, and we'll set it equal to the edit page props. It's perfect. Then inside of this function, let's create a const named note, and we'll set it equal to await. What we want to do here is get the note by the ID. So we want to use that function that we created, and we're using the params ID to identify it. If there is no notes, we'll need to care for validation first. So we'll say if no notes. We want to return a div, and we'll just say note not found. Otherwise, we want to display this note. So to make sure that this is working, I'm just going to test it out by passing in the note ID. Let's see. So it is not getting that note. Let's take a look at the action. And notes, not finding a note. Okay. Duh, because this note is created or deleted. So let's do this. We'll need to test update. We'll click it, click on update note, and it is redirecting us because this page is refreshing. So we won't be able to use this method. Let me see something. Redirect, update note. Yeah, it's not going to allow us to use it because it doesn't persist the data, but that's okay. We do have the ability to delete. I'm sorry we couldn't show the ability to update. Let me see something. Well, if it's saving it here, it should still. Yeah, it's not flowing over. And this is where it would be beneficial to have some form of state management or have this data persist in local storage, but it's all good. Is there another way that I could show this? Let me see something. Console.log note. Yeah, it's not getting it. It's showing that note is null. And this should be awaited. Yep, I'm aware of that change, but that shouldn't stop us from being able to get the note, but it's all good. But the reason this isn't working is because it's just not flowing through to this page. Well, but it's making the get request to get it. Do I have everything? Yeah, this looks good. Mm, 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 mm. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is stop here for today. And when we reconvene, um, we'll work on the error logic. And I think I will. hmm, So let me see this. Are we even getting the params? So it is getting the params. It's just not searching for it. It's not. Hmm. Let me see something with this function. Yeah, it's not going to show it because of how this data is being persisted. Um, I could update this for local storage, but I won't worry about it in this project since really we were just trying to display the server action mutation functionality. But in the next video, what I'll do is we'll set up a little local storage so that we can get the full CRUD functionality, and we'll also look at adding in error handling as well. So hope you enjoyed today's video. I think we covered and learned a lot as it relates to server actions in Next.js. If you did, feel free to give me a like. Leave any comments about suggestions for the next one. Also, consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video as well. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one.